I mean, Jason and Sachs look like fucking two accountants who've just been fired from Lehman Brothers in 2008.
Absolutely. We're carrying our boxes out to the street and getting a taxi.
Sachs does look appropriate for his setting.
How long are you in DC for, Saxapil? You in and out one day? What are you doing?
Yeah, I'm flying back tonight for the fundraiser tomorrow morning.
Who's the fundraiser with? You want to tell everybody?
Big boy?
Yeah, it's an April Fool's joke. I'm hosting a fundraiser for a Democrat.
Blue State. He's trolling everybody with his blue state. Put your red tie on. Put your red tie. You have a red tie with you, Sax?
I wore a blue tie today.
Really? Oh, you're trolling?
The full troll is on. Oh,
wow. What a little, what a little troll artist. All right, let's get started.
Let your winners ride.
Rain Man David Sax.
And instead, we open source it to the fans, and they've just gone crazy with it.
Love you, besties. Queen of Quinoa. All right, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the All In Podcast. With us back from his Tahoe vacation. You were certainly missed, even though the episode was record-setting. The Queen of Quinoa himself. He'll reboot your physique with his Munich. Puts the mana in the kana. And he's your pal from NorCal, the Sultan of Science. David Friedberg, how you doing, brother?
Shit, you have a whole sequence of these things? This is great.
You do actually do work for this podcast
If you can keep this going every week, it'll be amazing.
I mean,
I just felt like getting a plug-in for Munich and Kana. That was if I could get two portfolio companies in one.
Hit Sachs and me. Let's go.
All right, well, you know, he's back with us again, the czar of ARR, the savant of SaaS. He puts the ass in Asperger's. He's the sucker. He's a sucker for Tucker, the Rain Man himself, David Sachs.
That's so good.
All right, next up, the dictator, agitator, and our frequent collaborator. He's back-to-back with the SPACs, a trendsetter with his sweaters. The future he can foresee, Chamath Palihapitiya. We got you, everybody.
It's not as good as David's, I got to say.
Well, there's a lot to go with Asperger's, Tucker. I mean, the material for Sachs, I could have done 20 minutes. 20 minutes. I could have done 20 minutes on Sachs. Sachs, you are, of course, in DC with some Star Chamber thing. You, Bannon, Teal. What Star Chamber bullshit are you doing in
I spoke at a foreign policy conference today called...
What's the name of it?
It's called Up From Chaos and sponsored by a group called the American Moment and the American Conservative.
What did you speak about?
It's called Up From Chaos because our foreign policy has been chaos for the last 30 years. The United States has been in 7 wars. How many trillions have we spent on nation building? We've lost all of those wars. Name one war we've won. Look at all the lives that have been lost. Thousands and thousands of our soldiers. And then, millions of innocent people all over the world. I've said it before. This is what happens when the United States goes around the world stampeding like a raging elephant. We need a more restrained foreign policy. So that's what I've been articulating. I don't know what about that makes it either conservative or liberal. But, what we need is more restraint.
Well, first of all, it's too
less
logical.
Interventionism. It's too logical, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty much everyone in this town. I mean, there's no lobby for decreasing our involvement, right? Because the military industrial complex has gotten so big and so powerful.
I mean, Trump did not want to start wars. It was a key piece of his platform. And it did seem up until, and we'll get into this obviously, up until the gaffe from Biden 12 hours after I said you weren't giving him the benefit of the doubt. He threw me right under the bus.
Biden just declared a new world order. I mean, he is
regime change with Putin.
Yeah, and he said regime change. I mean, he's bought into this liberal interventionism. Obama was much better. I mean, Obama had all the right instincts. He de-escalated things in Ukraine. We could have had the situation back in 2014. Obama pulled the plug. And he de-escalated it in Syria over the objections of his staff. I mean, the problem is Obama basically got played by the staff and the establishment.
Because Obama was there for 8 years and he knew that, it was all about doing the right thing and also about the legacy and the judgment that would look back on his decisions, whereas everybody else is like, well, I'm here for this 4-year grift and I'll be back for another 4 years later. So, the more chaos, the better for a lot of those people.
He couldn't get us out of Afghanistan. Why couldn't he get us out of Afghanistan, Sachs? Because he wanted to, right?
He got played by the generals. So Ben Rhodes wrote a book. Ben Rhodes was sort of one of Obama's right-hand guys, and he coined a term that stuck for called the blob, which is the term for this sort of Washington foreign policy establishment. All the people in the State Department and the think tanks and the sort of the journalists who love being the drums of war. I mean, that whole establishment that just is addicted to war. And, if you read that Atlantic magazine interview called The Obama Doctrine, where Obama is interviewed, he lays it out. He says, look, there is a foreign policy playbook that presidents are expected to follow. In response to any provocation, any incident, you're supposed to react in a highly militarized way. And if you don't, you get attacked. And the generals, he wanted to get out of Afghanistan, but the generals started leaking against him that it'd be a fiasco. And then, unfortunately, Obama didn't stick to his guns. He didn't want to take those political hits. It was unfortunate. He really should have.
We'll get into Ukraine at the end of the show, but let's talk a little bit about markets up top here. The U.S. yield curve inversion is upon us. Maybe you could give us, CP, a little primer on what this means, the inverted yield curve, and why people are talking about it this week.
Well, I think people, were talking about it. The reason they were is that they believe that it predicts a recession. And specifically what they look at is the interest rate on a 2-year bond and an interest rate on a 10-year bond, and you subtract one from the other. And when it inverts, what it means is that, typically in a healthy economy, you want rising interest rates over a long period of time. And the reason you would want that is that you are guessing that the economy will be healthy. There'll be a nominal amount of inflation, so things will tentatively increase in price. And as a result of that, you need to get paid more for the future than today, right? So if you want me to take 10-year risk, you need to pay me a little bit more than if you want me to take 2-year risk. And so things should go up and to the right. But when all of that stuff 10 years out, all of a sudden is trading for a lower yield than today, what people think will happen is that, governments will cut interest rates massively. They tend to do that in order to stimulate the economy, right? To get money back into the system. And they tend to do that because of a recession. And so people look at the difference between the 2-year bond and the 10-year bond, and they try to guess what's going to happen. Here's the problem with all of this. It turns out that it's not as correlated as one thinks. And Nick, I posted this link, so you can just put it up there. But a bunch of economists at the Fed actually went and, you have access to this data. They back tested this. And what they found was that there was actually a more predictive signal of recessions, which is the difference between the 3-month T-bill and the 18-month T-bill. And if you look at the 3s18 spread, they call that the forward spread at the Fed. That's actually not showing a recession at all. In fact, that shows a very healthy ascent, largely taking into account the fact that the Fed has told us that they're going to rip in a bunch of rate increases over the next year to 18 months. So what are we to do with all of this? Well, when there's been a recession, it has typically been true that both the 2s, 10s, and the forward spread have collapsed to zero or gone negative. That's this inversion. It has never really been the case that 2s, 10s inverts while the forward spread stays up and you have a recession. In the past, we've mentioned that when oil has these kinds of price spikes, it typically forecasts a recession. So if you put all of this data together, it's a really murky picture. So what are you supposed to do? It's not totally clear to me. But I think the general way that I think the market is reacting to this is probably inappropriate, and I'll tell you why. And the setup, by the way, because of this inappropriateness, is actually quite interesting. So why is the reaction inappropriate? Look, if you think about where we were in November and where we are today, almost April 1st, right? So it's been 4 months, 5 months. We've had massive exposition of inflation. We've had massive disruptions to the supply chain. We've had the beginning of a war whose end is somewhat indeterminate today. That's causing a bunch of spikes in a bunch of really critical commodities the entire world needs. We've had a Federal Reserve that went from hiking 50 or 75 basis points to hiking 200 to 250 basis points by the estimated average. And so all of these things have happened, yet the market is basically at an all-time high, plus or minus 5%. That really doesn't hang together at some really basic logical level, right? So what's going to happen? Well, Brad said this last week. What has actually happened under the hood is a dispersion, which means the crappy companies have gotten crushed and the good companies have gotten whacked, but not crushed. Okay? And then when they rally disproportionately in favor of the good companies. So what are we doing right now? I think we are going to see this diversion of companies, and we're about to go through earnings season, right? We're at the end of Q1. And I think what's going to happen is really interesting. You're going to have a handful of companies who have a great handle on their business, who actually project strength. I know what I'm doing. I know how I'm going to perform. The levers are in my control. I'm going to invest for the future. I'm going to go and consolidate a market. Those companies will get rewarded. And then anybody else who has a whiff of indecision or whose structural business is flawed, and then they use all of these other issues as a reason to explain their flawed business, will get completely whacked. 2 examples over this last week, and we had this debate. People were talking about Restoration Hardware and the CEO basically saying the sky is falling and there's a huge recession. And, my comment is, well, if you take the other side of the coin, Restoration Hardware sells overpriced, crappy furniture into a housing market that's basically shut down because refi rates are at 5%. There's the other explanation for why his business is crappy. It doesn't necessarily have to be a recession.
Well, and just to clearly define it, a recession is 2 quarters or more of negative growth, the economy contracting. And we've had about a dozen of these since World War II. We remember a couple of them in our lifetimes. Obviously, the COVID situation created a recession for a couple of quarters. And then we had the Great Recession, which lasted, I think that was over a year, right? That was 6 quarters, I think, 5 quarters. So these happen every 10 years or so. So if we do have a recession, and it seems implausible to me that we would have negative growth for 2 quarters. So,
well, the other interesting company, for example, was UiPath, which UiPath got whacked today 25 or 26%. And what they actually reported was that they thought that they were going to increase ARR to 1.2 billion from like 900. That's a huge, at that scale, to grow 35, 40% in ARR in a year is really quite incredible. But their ACV numbers and their revenue numbers were a little soft. They got whacked. And now they're trading, like 11 times ARR. So you have some of these companies that are going to blame macro headwinds, but they may actually just have a flawed business model. You'll have these other companies who actually overperform, but may have been a little bit too highly valued, who'll get valuation reset on any faint weakness. And so, it's going to be really up to these CEOs and these boards when they write their earnings releases to be very precise. Those that have a handle on their business, I think, are going to get really rewarded. And those that don't need to blame the macro market and just get all the bad news out now, because this is the quarter. It doesn't get any better from here.
Sachs, best ways to fight a recession: cut spending. Increase government spending, cut taxes. Where are we at in terms of how many bullets we have left to do these kind of things? We don't really have a, ability to spend more money. And I guess lowering interest rates is the other way to stimulate it. Do we even know we're going into a recession? So do you think we're going into a recession? If we are, is there a way to reverse it through the normal tactics?
We're definitely going into a slowdown. And whether it becomes a recession is to be determined. I think there's a very good chance because we already were headed for a slowdown because of interest rate increases, because of inflation. And now on top of it, we've got all the supply chain disruptions from this war. And we know that, unplugging the 144 million Russians in the Russian economy, we've basically unplugged that from the global economy. So that's going to hit our economy. There's a little bit of a delayed reaction there. So these are all negative indicators. And I think we're either going to have a recession or something very close to it.
And they typically last 11 months, right, Sachs? So how long would the recession be? I think it's typically 11 months, 2 quarters,
I guess normally,
6 quarters.
Yeah, normally it's like 18 months till you get back to where you're supposed to be or something like that. But you're right. We have very limited tools to fight this because we've already broken the glass in case of emergency for COVID. We spent something like 10 trillion. By the way, that's what caused a lot of the problems is we flooded the zone with liquidity. Now we're trying to mop that up with interest rate increases, that's slowing down the economy. So there's nothing left to really spend. You can't really drop interest rates much more. And if you do, you'll get much worse inflation. So it seems to me that we don't have a lot of tools here, and we could end up with something like a 1970s style stagflation, where we continue to see inflation with a slowing economy.
Let's unpack what that experience would be like. Economy slowing, there's less job openings, people are spending less money while the prices of goods and services continue to go up.
That's why they spend less money. And that's why there's recession. Like, I mean, you're paying $6 for gas, you have less money to go out for dinner every week, right? You pay, twice as much for an airplane ticket. You don't spend as much on the hotel. I mean, like, the rippling effects of the rate of inflation are decreased spending, and there isn't enough time for, the new job creation engine to catch up. And, without a stimulus effect, you're in trouble. That's really the situation we're in. And that's what, can kind of cause these stagflationary effects to drag on.
Almost every other time we've had a recession, people couldn't find jobs. And I can remember them qualitatively, people saying, hey, I want to get a job. I need more money. I can't find one. And now we're sitting here with more jobs than we can fill. There's still over 10 million jobs available, and people are still resigning from jobs. So how do we factor in the labor market, Chamath?
Well, it's
super confounding. It's just not like previous ones.
It is. I actually think, Jason, the explanation for all of this is not necessarily about the supply-demand dynamics of labor, but our social policies related to our birth rate and immigration. I posted this article link for you guys to read in The Atlantic, but basically our birth rate in 2021 absolutely fell off a cliff. It was less than 300,000 net births in the entire country. And net birth is defined as immigration plus births minus deaths. And when you look under the covers, we had two really discontinuously bad things. One that has been building since Trump, and one that was acute. The thing that was acute was that in 2021, after we had vaccines, which is a crazy thing to think about, we had 1 million deaths basically, right? Because of COVID. So that's 1 million people that largely exited the workforce, plus or minus. Obviously, not all of those people working, but I think the overwhelming majority.
Well, probably 50%. We have 50-60% labor participation.
More. I suspect.
Some could have been retired, right?
That's what I'm saying. I think it's probably like 70-80% of the people that died were probably in the workforce in some way. So you had all those people leave. We have a troublesome issue with births and birth rates. All Western economies do. Basically, as the standard of living goes up and as the equality between men and women go up, birth rates go down. Without commenting on the dynamics of that, that is just true. And so, we should celebrate that in the sense that, like, you want increasing equality, you want people to have more choice, et cetera, all these things. So how do you make up for the gap? Well, you make up for the gap in immigration. And the problem is that Trump closed the door.
Yep.
And Biden has not reopened the door. And so, we have had a meaningful fall off in immigration. It doubly compounded because of COVID, we had border controls and we shut the borders completely. So even if, you were a student that would come here, odds were maybe you'd get a master's or a PhD and then stay here. None of those people can. So nobody can get in. So that's the real problem that we have to solve, Jason, which is that you're not going to get, families to all of a sudden have kids. That's a 18-year problem if you started that problem today to get them into the workforce, or 25-year problem. So immigration is really the only solution, and we don't really have the sponsorship to do that at a domestic policy level.
Well, and then you add to that the fact that labor participation, which when we were coming up, 67, 68% of people in the country were choosing to work, and now we're down in the 60% and maybe ticking up to 62%. It looks like on that Fred website. So we need to greatly increase the number of people in the country and the people participating in the labor force if we're to avoid a recession, right? More people working means more economic.
We need to boost it. Yeah, I would encourage everybody to read this Atlantic article because I think Nick Thompson does a very good job of just basically summarizing the issues that we have.
Freeberg, what are your thoughts here? Is it getting more people to participate in the labor force, importing more people, both? And then how do you get that to actually happen?
Sorry, Derek Thompson, not Nick Thompson.
Look, I'm not an economist, but I don't know if that really solves the acute runaway problem that we're experiencing right now. Well, one thing I'll say about inflation, let's say you're running a company and you raise your prices, you're not often going back and dropping your prices again. And, you have to have a catch-up effect for income and savings to make up for the increment in pricing. And that's really, a key driver right now, that the rate at which prices are going up, and, sure, gas and other commodities trade back down, but consumables, durables typically stay high after they inflate. You end up having, kind of this persisting effect, and it's really hard to kind of just grow your way out of that. So, without stimulus. And so, I'm not sure the labor solution is going to solve this kind of acute problem that we're going to be facing that seems to be, at this point, dragging on.
What do you think about the argument, though, that there's a substitutional effect? Meaning, when prices of goods rise, people find cheaper goods. And then separately, what happens is, part of a productive society is you make better and more interesting and more useful goods and services. And, incrementally, especially if you use technology, those things tend to be deflationary. So they do get cheaper. Meaning, you used to pay for photo storage. Dropbox comes along, gives it away for free. Then Google comes along and gives everything away for free.
Yep.
So you have this natural deflationary effect where you tend to save money on the things you used to pay for, because a lot of people find that they can build a different kind of business model to monetize giving it to you or subsidizing it. I
think this is the key, Chamath, is that if prices go up, then entrepreneurs are going to look and say, there's a better way to do this. You want to go on vacation? You want to stay somewhere for 2 weeks? You can't afford the hotel? Okay, let's try this new thing like this Airbnb. Somebody rents you their apartment, they move in with another person. For the week, you use their apartment and you can rent for $150 a night instead of $350 at a hotel. That pricing, when there's runaway pricing, people come up with better solutions for people.
Yeah, I think that's generally been true. And by the way, if you think about the biggest areas that have been sticky, which are energy policy and housing policy, the way that we'll have to unlock better pricing in those markets will be because we deregulate, not by increasing regulation, but by massive deregulation. We have massive NIMBYism up and down the stack that prevents us from building the housing supply we need. That has to get fixed, right? And we need to have better energy policy. Like, for example, you take a state like California, it's the most populous state in the country. It's the richest state in the country, but it has electricity prices that are 3 times higher than the national average. That doesn't make any sense, right? And so, how do you expect renewables to really compete when people are still incentivized to fire coal and nat gas? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. These prices cannot be this high. They're high because of lobbying and because of lobbyists and special interests. And so if you rip that stuff out by deregulation, you actually allow, as you said, Jason, entrepreneurs to do the right thing, and they will push prices back down.
Sachs?
What's your question?
Well, I thought you might want to comment on what we're talking about, entrepreneurs creating products and services that lower prices, that then, maybe create the exit ramp here to inflation and stagflation, some combination of that's going to be upon us.
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of entrepreneurial energy in the U.S. It's strong. That technology does cause deflation. It's deflationary. But this is not going to help us get out of what's coming over the next year or two. Look, the bottom line is that we had a massive government overreaction to COVID, in which we printed and spent way too much money, something like 10 trillion plus. And, this is the classic hangover after the party. They put the punch bowl out for way too long, and now we're all going to pay the price for it.
They spiked the punch bowl.
They spiked the punch bowl big time.
Yeah.
And we're already seeing it. Think about all the advice we're giving our portfolio companies to slow down their spending and extend their runway. Every board in America is going to be doing that. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. But this yield curve inversion is, fairly predictive. I mean, it's not perfect, but, CNBC had this report today. Historically, it's meant when the yield curve inverts, there's been a better than 2/3 chance of a recession at some point in the next year, and greater than 98% chance of recession at some point in the next 2 years. So it looks to me
it needs to be inverted for at least 90 days typically. But again, I think if you look at the forward spread from the Fed, it's more accurate than the 2 cents. But your point is the same. something is happening that we need to take seriously, and none of the outcomes here are growthy good outcomes. And the policy wonks in Washington really need to figure out what their position is going to be on this stuff and what they push next in terms of legislation. Because we're going to be going into the back half of the year in a midterm election where the economy is slowing, interest rates are high, prices are high. This is a horrible setup for the Democrats.
Yeah, and let's think about what the priorities of the administration have been throughout all of this. I mean, 1 year ago, they did that whole $2 trillion American Rescue Plan. They were warned by people like Stanley Druckenmiller that retail was back, the consumer was back, and yet they still printed $2 trillion. That caused a huge amount of inflation. It totally backfired. And that wasn't the end of it. If they had their way, we would have had $4 trillion more of spending and the whole Build Back Better. Now Biden just floated this new trial balloon over this unrealized gains tax. So last year, they floated the trial balloon about basically doing a wealth tax, and everyone hated it. And now they just proposed it again. It was insane. And even when they brought it out, they leaked that they had Manchin's support behind it. And then the next day, Manchin came out and disavowed it and said, no, I don't support this. I mean, what is the administration thinking? It makes no sense.
Well, I mean, clearly
and then on foreign policy, I mean, I strongly believe we could have cut a deal on Ukraine a year ago to diffuse this whole situation before it turned into a war. Now we got a war over there.
Well, let's talk about what they should do. I mean, number one on the list for me is we should be getting every entrepreneur from around the world, any really intelligent person who wants to go to graduate school here into this country. We need to have like a Manhattan Project to just scoop up all these mutant geniuses from around the world and get them here and get them starting companies here.
You don't even need to do that. It was working.
And don't fuck it up.
Bush, Obama, all you had to do was just leave it alone. Everybody who was any good at anything wanted to come to the United States, including the three of us.
Yep.
And all of a sudden it's like, nah, it's good. Yeah, I pass.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you set out that you hate entrepreneurs and you resent them for success, don't be surprised if they want to stay in a country that
But I don't think that's what it was. I think it was much crueler than that. I think that we went to a posture that said, okay, you know what? Net new immigration was viewed as something that was displacing people, wasn't a net value creator, was, in some cases viewed very xenophobically. And that is really problematic because it's actually about a large population issue. And it's about how you construct a healthy, thriving population.
Yeah. This was Trump's worst approach. He was best approach, clearly not starting wars, worst approach, shutting the borders down for some populist reason when we actually need people in the country.
Well, hold on. But see, the way you just framed that is why I think there's a problem, which is, look, obviously the immigration is a very fraught issue, but the choice that's being presented to us by our political parties is either you're in favor of immigration, like bringing in all these superstars, like we have founders in Silicon Valley, that makes sense, or you're in favor of open borders. I mean, why are those the two choices? That we either have H-1Bs or we have an open border? I mean, that makes no sense. I mean, what we should have is a sensible immigration. First of all, we should strip the border security issue out of it, because whatever the number of immigrants that you want to allow,
should be pro-border security.
I mean, we need a point-based system. We need to have a reasonable discussion between Democrats and Republicans about a point-based system. There's a qualitative distance.
You've advocated that for a long time, and it works in Canada. And I think you're absolutely
Australia, New Zealand, UK. They all have this. It's like, what does our country need right now? Okay, do we need people, who are laborers, or do we need people starting companies? Do we need, scientists?
I don't know if you've noticed, but to me, this is very equivalent to the removal of SAT and ACT scoring and admissions in college.
Explain.
The notion of merit, the notion of performance is not one that really matters in this country as much right now, as much as the notion of equity. And equity really has kind of become the mainstay of not just how we're making policy decisions on a local level, but a lot of these kind of national issues are becoming about equity. And it's about, equitable consideration for wealth creation for existing citizens in the United States, and the perception that a minority of people or some majority of people actually missed out on significant wealth creation over the past couple of decades as globalization and technology advances have accelerated growth in our economy, and the share of that growth has been disproportionately assigned to a small percentage of people. And I think it is that same notion that drives a lot of the kind of sub decisions, the local decisions that we're making, as well as these important policy decisions. And the point that I think is critical, that's really hard to get across to everyone or anyone for that matter, is that, and I've talked about this a lot, but progress brings everyone forward, but it doesn't bring everyone forward symmetrically, right? Progress brings everyone forward.
Give an example, Freeberg.
So Amazon's a great example. I've used it a lot. With Amazon, we've all been given access to more goods and cheaper goods than we would have had before. So we all benefit from that progress, right? Everyone can get on an app and get a friggin' inflatable swimming pool delivered to their home and the vitamins they need within 24 hours at half the price of what it would have cost them to go down to the local Ace Hardware store. That's an incredible benefit for all of us. So our share of wallet on that sort of goods has gone down. Therefore, we can spend more, get access to more stuff, and we're all prospering. And if you think back to what life was like 30 years ago, 20 years ago, to those of you who, were spending money 20 years ago or whatever, it's an incredibly different proposition than what we had back then. And it really has changed the world and changed all of us as consumers' ability to consume more. That's amazing. The problem is Jeff Bezos is worth $160 billion. So everyone looks at that and they want to lambaste Jeff Bezos and they want to say this is unfair. And equity becomes the discussion, which is why is one guy worth $160 billion? The reality is he benefited everyone. Everyone got benefit from the value that he helped create in this world, in this market. And then the reaction is, we got to stop this from happening. We can't let people be worth $160 billion without putting their eye on the point that, I'm spending $3,000 a year less because of this technology that he brought to market. And so there's a lot of these solutions that I would say are progressive. They progress us all as a society. Everything from biotech to technology and software to any sort of business or services innovation that people are willing to pay money for, that people are willing to embrace in an open and free market. And then what happens is the spoils of that progress aggregate in a small way to a small number of people. And that's the payoff in capitalism. But when that happens over and over again for 250 years, you fast forward, and by the way, a lot of those compound, people wake up and they say, I don't want that anymore. And they miss the fact that progress is taken for granted. And here we are. We want to give up progress and we want to get equity. And it's going to cause a real ripple effect that's going to last for decades. And it's not the first time we've seen it, right? This has happened historically over cycles that last hundreds of years, and it's happening now in the United States and in the entire Western world. And I think it's going to be really unfortunate generally for progress. And all the ones, and all the advocates for equity are going to kind of raise their hand.
I think you're totally right. What's the solution? Because it's just a really sad.
I've thought about this a lot. And, I look at what China did, and everyone's going to say I'm pro-China. But what was interesting about China recently is they ratchet up and they ratchet down that free market system. So they allow progress and then they disallow progress when the equity meter goes the wrong way. And so if you kind of think about an equity meter and a progress meter, you have to balance those two over time, because otherwise what happens is you spring back. And then the springing back is when governments change, revolutions happen, democracy falls apart, autocracies arise, all those sorts of awful things. Or really, I would say those cyclical things that happen. I don't want to characterize any of them as good or bad, but the cyclical things that happen with society over time. And so, that is effectively what's happening, guys. Like the ultra high tax rate, the regulatory regime, the government coming in and stopping Facebook. I mean, these sorts of behaviors are almost like an attempt to mute and ratchet down both inequity as well as the unfortunate side effect of progress.
Right.
And I think
we're basically punishing excellence. And that is challenging for long-term growth.
You're minimizing progress to improve the rate of equity of distribution of gains, right? And it's very hard, because by the way, what you're also doing is you're relating a first derivative and a second derivative effect. And so, first order and second order effect. So it becomes a really difficult thing and people don't really see it this way. People see kind of the very, myopic view of, I got to redistribute wealth. I got to help people that are out of jobs. These guys have only seen their income go up by 10%, while everyone else's income's gone up by 40%. And so, politicians, legislators react to that circumstance. But the zooming out is that circumstance arose as we all made progress with respect to security, with respect to health, with respect to food availability, with respect to consumables being cheaper, et cetera, all these great things that progress has given us. And there's a ratcheting effect. The hope I have is that ratcheting isn't too binary. It doesn't flip too far back the other way too fast, in which case you have a socialist state arise, a revolution arise, all the things that we've seen kind of come out of
or people just canceling AP math in California.
Precisely. And then the rippling effects of no more AP math and no more SATs is, fast forward 20 years.
MIT brought back I don't know if you saw this week, MIT brought back SATs as a qualifier after they paused it. I think a lot of people are starting to realize this is a road to nowhere. Sachs, what do you think is, to Chamath's point, is there a solution to get America behind excellence and pragmatic, kind of solutions for immigration? And if there is a way to do that, how would you do it?
Well, I think, like we were talking about, you got to kind of unpack the issue. So like we talked about, strip border security out of it. Don't make that part of it. Then I think you got to differentiate between high skill and low skill immigration, like what you called the point system. I mean, if you look at who's founding companies in Silicon Valley, something like 40% of startups have an immigrant co-founder. So clearly immigrants bring a ton of entrepreneurial energy to the US, but it's in our selfish interest to make sure that the immigrants we're letting in actually have the skills that make them potential founders. So I think would be smart for us to think that way. And you can't even really have that conversation, it seems like today, to have more of a skills-based immigration system. I mean, who's willing to say that?
Well, you could just say 3 buckets. Here's people who need amnesty because they're being persecuted in their country, and they're here because of humanitarian reasons. Here's a bucket for high performers who are going to add to our economy and create jobs. And then here's another bucket, which is a lottery and a lineup system. Hey, you want to come here because you don't have skill, but you want to come here because the country's so great. Okay, each of those buckets is going to have its own process, and your odds might be different in each bucket. Is that so hard for people to grok?
Right. But you got to remember, we're sitting in the economy. I mean, it's very easy for us to say this because we are sitting in Silicon Valley, and for us, immigration is an economic good. It's a benefit. But if you are in a part of the country or a part of the economy where you're in a low-wage job, maybe you're a service employee or you're a union employee in the Midwest, the more immigrants that are let in that are low skill, they compete with you and drive your wages down. And that's why people are against it. So that's basically the conundrum is, as long as you're talking about immigration as being a single thing, it's going to have a lot of political opposition. That's why we need to bifurcate it between high skill and low skill. Let in more high skill people and less low skill.
If you had to rank them from least controversial to most controversial, I think letting in high skilled labor is probably the least controversial thing. Then, and there is always controversy around this, it's always on the bucket of people for humanitarian grounds, right? Some people agree, some people disagree. Should these people be considered refugees? Should they not? How many of your family members should you be able to sponsor? How many not? Et cetera, et cetera. And that's somewhat controversial. But I think we can all agree the most controversial bucket are folks that would otherwise come that would be considered lower skill because they are the ones that really put pressure in very practical, measurable ways into the economy. And we just have to your point, segregate and differentiate how we think about this problem. Because again, if you take immigration, the word away, and actually just use immigration as an input to this equation on population stability, we have population instability right now. So unless we figure out something between live births and deaths, which I don't think we're going to solve tomorrow, it's going to create a very large imbalance that our economy and our country cannot really recover from.
You know what? You sparked my thinking there. It really is a framing issue. We should not call high-skilled labor coming here as immigration. We should be flipping that to talent acquisition. We should be looking at it as America is trying to get more talent here so we can win the industries that matter. And if we looked at it as this is talent acquisition, it has nothing to do with immigration. This is us going out and sourcing the smartest people to come here so our companies win against other companies in the global economy to create more jobs for American. Talent acquisition could be something we could be investing in. We should be thinking, how do we win that?
All the problems that ail us, the solution is in some hardworking group of men and women, of which some will be entrepreneurs who want to be here. We're trying to figure out how to actually build our own chips while there are semiconductor experts getting trained, whether here or abroad, who would want to be here to do that job on behalf of the United States, right? We want to figure out climate independence. There are men and women being trained here and abroad who want to be here and solve that problem on behalf of the United States, on and on and on and on. And that's what it means to be, and I'll use a sports analogy, the LA Lakers, right? That's what it means to be, the New England Patriots. Everybody wants to play for you. And so when you're in that position and you have that branding tailwind, you have to use it to your advantage to stack the deck in your favor so that you're constantly winning championships. Otherwise, you're being really derelict in your duty. And I think, hopefully if people look at the broad population level issue that we just exposed because of COVID, there was a stat in this article as an example. In the county of Los Angeles, we are now, in the last 20 years, we've seen a 50% reduction in the birth rate in LA from 150,000 births a year to about 100. And if you forecast that forward, before the turn of the century, the county of Los Angeles will have 0 net births. If you run that's insane.
Yeah.
So we need to figure out how to solve this problem, because it really impacts GDP. It impacts all these other issues that Friedberg just talked about as well. The sense of equality and fairness. If we're not creating and growing, we are going to fight over how to split a shrinking pie. And that does tend to lead to revolution.
Yeah, that's when it could get really gnarly. We're not growing. Entrepreneurs are not coming here. New jobs are not being created. Imagine if Amazon wasn't created.
The historical implications for what Friedberg said are really well defined in history. If you go back thousands of years, you look at every single time, an empire goes through that period of decline, when they have net negative growth, economic growth, and they have this sort of rising populism, what they end up doing is they end up fighting, and they have different ways of fighting, right? But they end up fighting over how to reallocate a shrinking pie. And there are many of those outcomes when they fight that ends up in, really turbulent moments in history.
Well, and that's where this wealth tax,
that's where we have a responsibility to make sure you don't end up going through, a Russia scenario, a China scenario, and there are more productive ways to solve these problems.
Oh, that's where the wealth tax that was floated, which seems it's DOA already, but this concept of everybody who's over $100 million having to assess all their worth and give 20% back minimum each year is that dividing of the pie. And I think, maybe they could allocate less money towards.
Can we all agree that, on the margins, when you make a lot of money, you can and should pay more taxes? I don't think that's a super controversial idea. On the margins, if you are a massive polluter, you should pay some taxes to compensate for the damage you're creating to the environment. These are not controversial ideas. The problem is that, what Sachs said is true. You take a sensible concept and then you pervert it because you have to contort it with all this language to make it political, and it loses all of its value in it. And so, for example, why does the administration have to write this potential law or proposal, in a way that so obviously violates the Constitution of the United States? Are they that dumb? I don't think they're that dumb. But they do it to appease some political aspect of the Democratic Party. And then as a result, it becomes DOA. Within 8 minutes of it being announced, Manchin says this is dead. What is the point of that theater?
It's virtual signaling. Yeah.
Aren't you a donor? You should know, right? What would they tell you? I mean, what's the Democratic Party saying about...
I think what they would say off the record is that these were sacrificial totems to the progressive left, meaning that they do it for window dressing to destroy. It's like throwing a cat a ball of yarn.
It seems like that populist progressive left is becoming a bigger base than it was historically.
In the Democratic Party, it is.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how big it is, but in the Democratic Party, look, it's where all the energy is in the Democratic Party, and it's where a lot of the donors are. That is who's driving the agenda in the Democratic Party today. That is why the Democrats are going to get shellacked in November. Read Roy Teixeira's Substack. He is the Democratic political consultant who wrote The Emerging Democratic Majority, predicting, this is back in 2002. He wrote a book about how there would be a new Democratic coalition of young voters and minorities and women, and they would come together, and that would create, Democratic majorities and Democratic presidents forever. And then Obama wins in 2008, and it looks like Teixeira's prediction's coming true. And he recently, in the last 2 years, has been warning that something's happened that he could never have predicted, which is that working class voters are now moving out of the Democratic Party. Not just whites, but also Hispanics and Asians, even black voters who are working class. They're all moving to the Republican Party. So he believes the Republican Party is losing its national majority. Why? Because progressives have taken over, and on cultural and social issues, they are much more liberal than the working class of this country. So basically what's happened is the Democrats have become a professional class party, and the Republicans are in the process of transforming into a working class party, and that's turning everything upside down. But ultimately, with Youngkin winning in Virginia last year, and I think the Republicans on a generic ballot are up plus 10, plus 12. I mean, they're going to have a huge, I think, wave in November. You got to remember that professionals, meaning college-educated voters, are only about a third of the electorate. I think about 37%. And then the other 63% are working class. The working class does not like this extreme socio-cultural progressive agenda. They don't like seeing their statues ripped down. They don't like this sort of what they see as kind of this antagonism towards American history and American icons. They don't believe in socialism, and so on down the line. And the Democratic Party is increasingly speaking only to itself. I mean, they are in an echo chamber. And I think these progressives are going to have to lose a few elections before they realize. I mean, the same thing happened to the Democratic Party back in the 1980s, right? You had Ronald Reagan and then George Herbert Walker Bush win 3 landslide elections, 1980, 1984, 88. And then the Democrats nominate these like horrible candidates, Jimmy Carter, Walter Mondale, Dukakis. And then who comes along? Bill Clinton comes along.
Easy on the Greeks. Dukakis was pretty great.
Okay, like we found the one fan. Who comes along?
He was terrible.
Who comes along in 1992? Bill Clinton, and he has this whole new faction within the Democratic Party, the DLC, and his explicit mandate was to lead them back to the center. And then he chooses Al Gore as his running mate to double down on that image. I don't think Al Gore actually was that centrist. I think but his image at that time was that he was pretty centrist. So you had I think at that time. So their Democratic Party had to lose for about 12 years before they nominated a candidate and put him at the leadership of the party who could drag them back to the center. Now, listen, I mean, all we have right now are foreshadowings of this. We have the Youngkin victory last year. We have the fact those 3 school board members in San Francisco got kicked out. We'll see what happens to Chesa Boudin on June 7th. So we're getting these glimmers, and I think November will be a big test. But where I think this thing is headed is that the working class voters of this country don't like this radical progressive shift in the Democratic Party. And the Democratic Party is going to keep losing until they're willing to make changes.
Well, immigration is just such an easy one. And courting the working person is what the Democrats did forever. So I don't know how they can screw this up.
Well, but remember, working class voters are not in favor of immigration, J. Cal. They do not want unlimited number of immigrants coming in.
Well, they don't want unlimited, but they would like to see their family members.
And driving their wages down.
But they do want their family members to be allowed in. So for the folks who
you talk to Hispanic voters who are citizens in America, they are not in favor of unlimited immigration because that creates wage pressure for them.
Reasonable.
I'm telling you, that it's not like what you think. The higher you are economically in the social strata, the more professional you are, the more you like immigration. Because like for people like us, we like immigrants because they found companies and we invest in them. We see the economic vitality that they bring. But if you are a working class, okay, you do not want that wage pressure. You just don't. So unless the Democrats figure out a way to talk about it the way we're talking about it, where we separate high skill and low skill, they will lose with that message.
All right, let's get into some other things happening in the market. SEC is proposing a new set of rules to regulate SPACs. I wonder if anybody here can chime in on this. Who knows about it?
I wrote an editorial in Bloomberg basically a year ago, spelling out a bunch of new regulations that I thought the SEC should adopt. They adopted a lot of them in this draft, so I think that that's really good. They missed a couple of key things, and this is again tying back to this other thing. When we're in this phase right now where we are really questioning how capitalism should work, I think that there are 2 reactions that people can have. One is you pass more regulation that entrenches existing advantages. And the other is you pass regulation that either deregulates or democratizes a market. And if I had to cast the half of my proposals that the SEC adopted, I would say it falls more into the first bucket than the second. And Jason, you've spoken to the second bucket of laws that the SEC could also change, which is, it's in their power to give people an on-ramp to prove that they are qualified and accredited so that they can participate in some of these really, vibrant ways of making money beyond just investing in the S&P 500, like investing in startups if you're educated and capable of doing. The SEC at the same time proposed a bunch of legislation around reporting requirements for ESG. And if you look at both of these two buckets of laws, I think they're rooted in good ideas, and I think that there's some good concepts in it. But who really wins? I think if you look at it, the American Bar Association had a huge victory here because the amount of incremental regulation is going up, which means, what was a 300-page filing with the SEC will now be 350 pages, right? I think that benefits lawyers. I think it benefits consultants. I think it benefits the accountants. So I think it benefits the ecosystem people that participate. It's not so clear how normal everyday folks benefit from a lot of this stuff. So I think if you strip it all away, what I would say is I think the SEC is trying to do the right thing, but I would really encourage them to do the second half of what they should be doing, which is making these on-ramps better built.
So generally speaking, what do you think happens in the SPAC space? We had 600 of them after you started this.
It's going to consolidate to the 10 of us that know what we're doing.
Got it.
Just like, look, the IPO rules are extremely sophisticated. Did it hurt Morgan Stanley or Goldman Sachs' IPO business? No, it just meant that the 95 small banks that did IPOs went away and it consolidated to 6, and the league tables, just churned between the 6. JP Morgan 1 year is the top, then it's Morgan Stanley, then it's Goldman Sachs, then it's B of A, then it's Credit Suisse. Similarly, SPACs will consolidate around 6 or 7 players and, will do most of the business.
What do you think, Friedberg, of this new SEC announcement that they're considering climate disclosures for publicly traded companies? This would basically not only what they're doing in terms of consuming or allowing greenhouse gases and emissions, but also this scope 3 concept, your inputs. What is your supply chain doing, and what are your consumers doing? So if you're making the iPhone, what happens to the iPhone when the consumer gets rid of it? Or what did it take to get those minerals out of the ground to make the iPhone? What do you think? Is this a net benefit? Is it the lawyers win? Or does measuring all this actually mean we're going to see publicly traded companies manage it better? A lot of opting into it already, like Google and Apple, are doing it on their own accord. But what do you think generally of this regulation?
Well, let me just say something on the SPACs, and then I'll answer that question. If you read the comment, the first SEC proposed rule, it was to amend the definition of a blank check company to make the liability safe harbor for forward-looking statements, such as business forecasts, unavailable in filings by SPACs. So, this was, I think one of the primary points of appeal over the past couple of years. We've all been sophisticated private market investors. When we take a pitch or hear a pitch from a company, we all have the experience and the know-how, not always correctly, but at least we know what to look for, what to ask. And over time have learned through our wounds and our failures to appropriately diligence, forecast, and understand what they mean and what they say. And, because the public markets historically through an IPO are available to retail investors, generally whatever the definition is of unqualified or, folks who may not have the level of sophistication that, some regulatory body has deemed is needed to be able to do that level of diligence. The statements that are made in an IPO, in an S1, need to be kind of factually referenceable. And that's not true when it comes to forecasts, and that's why they're not included in S1s in an IPO. But in a SPAC, the appeal was you can tell your forward-looking forecast, paint the rosy picture like you would for a startup, and then theoretically, the investor should make an assessment of the risk and the upside and the objectives that the business is saying they're going to go shoot for and achieve. And it's pretty evident, and I think we all knew this, coming out of last year, that, many investors made investments on the basis of those forecasts, being to some degree reasonably achievable or likely achievable. And it turns out that in many cases they were not and were not achieved. And that's the big motivation here. So the real fundamental question with respect to Chamath's point about markets is how much do you want to have the government and a regulator play the role of deciding who is and who isn't sophisticated enough to make an assessment about a business's forward-looking prospects? Or should we simply keep all forward-looking prospects or forecasts like this out of those documents? And it's an important conversation to have, because for years people have been saying, I want to invest in private companies, but I'm not a qualified investor. Therefore, I'm only going to be able to invest in public companies. And as we're seeing, the problem with investing in private companies or speculative companies is that you're investing on the come, and more often than not, that doesn't end up happening. And that's a really hard lesson to learn. And SPACs have kind of forced the retail market that have not historically invested in private companies to learn that lesson very fast.
This is why, by the way, in my what I was asking the SEC to do on top of the things that they already did was I said, make us all invest our own money. Make the sponsor really monetarily at risk. I've invested a minimum of $100 million in every single deal I've done as a SPAC sponsor. That's a lot of money.
More skin in the game, and disclosing that would be great. And maybe even having a clearinghouse where you could see the percentage of cash to the ultimate raise that the promoter has.
All of that stuff worked great. All of that stuff, Jason, is in the spirit of disclosure and transparency. I just wish they would have done that.
You still think it's important to have forward-looking statements in these in SPACs? I mean, if that ends up becoming the cornerstone of this proposed regulation,
I don't think it's a cornerstone. I think the thing is that there are really important businesses that need good stewards to help them get into the public markets to raise money to fund their business. And there are some people who really understand that, and there are many others who don't. And the thing that the SEC should make a decision on is whether just having a bunch of middlemen serves a market better, or having a combination of some middlemen and some principals all competing is better. Because remember, what is capitalism really? You have these trapped sources of money, right? When you buy an equity, right, or you buy a bond, you're putting money into a trapped asset. It's an unproductive asset. It may yield some return, but it's not really generating it. It's dead money. Capitalism is about creating an incentive for you to take that money out of that dead asset, that unproductive asset, and put it directly into the hands of somebody who will make it productive. I'm going to, build some oil fields. I'm going to make
a battery
factory. I'm going to make
product,
shoes,
service,
whatever it is, right? And so, having more competition that creates the incentives for that process to happen, to go from point A to point B, should be the goal of the government. Because in the absence of that, again, going back to the previous conversation, you're going to basically shrink the incentives of productivity. And I don't think that's what anybody wants to have happen in the United States.
Such an easy solution to all of this. We have a test if you want to drive a car. And if you want to drive a big car called the truck, you have to get a different test. If you want to drive a motorcycle, so I didn't take that.
By the way, Jason, I just wanted to...
Why not have a test?
You brought up a really good point earlier, and I just wanted to put a fine point on what you said.
Yeah.
Let's just say all these companies, all of our startups included, will now, when we go public, have to create these disclosures around scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions. And there's this weird concept called materiality that exists in law, which will now, again, have to get adjudicated. Let's say Apple doesn't disclose what's actually happening in their factories. Somebody can now sue them because they will say, that's a material disclosure that you didn't disclose. Well, guess what will happen? That'll wind its way and meander its way through the courts. It'll take years. There will be tens and tens of millions of dollars spent on that litigation because Apple will vehemently defend the right that it wasn't a material disclosure, because the implications otherwise will be measured in the billions or tens of billions of dollars. So who really wins? Consultants win. Trial experts win. The lawyers win.
Lobbyists.
Jason, I just want to frame this up for a second, because I think it's important for people to think about, costs that are external to the business operation, meaning costs that are borne by the broader society, by other members of society, not the business itself. So let's say that you're a company that makes products with a lot of sugar, and, or cigarettes that, we know when people consume a lot of sugar, cancer goes up, obesity goes up, diabetes goes up. The cost for cancer treatment, the cost for diabetes treatment, the cost for medical treatment associated with smoking or sugar or alcohol is borne by a health system where the ultimate cost is shared by a large group of society, by all number of members. Whether that's a public health insurance program or a private one, there's a group that shares that cost. And so you as a consumer are not paying that cost today. The question is, should you be paying that cost? And this is true for CO2 emissions, for carbon emissions. You drive a gas guzzling car, you purchase gasoline, there is carbon that goes in the atmosphere. You're not going to end up individually fixing the carbon out of the atmosphere later. The rest of us are going to have to bear that cost as our homes burn down, as floods cause, houses to wash away, as all the catastrophe that we're all predicting is going to happen starts to happen. So the question is, how do you account for those external costs? And then the second question that will arise in a market-based system that we have is, who's going to pay for those costs? Right now, we all assume those costs and we don't charge anyone for them. We don't charge anyone for the obesity epidemic. We don't charge anyone for the cancer epidemic associated with cigarettes until we had that big legislation that the DOJ knocked that off. We don't charge anyone today for carbon emissions that we're all going to have to pay the cost for. And so, the first step is identifying and quantifying the external costs of the product or service that you're providing and deciding whether or not to tax the consumer of that product, whether or not to tax the seller of that product, and ultimately how to transition that capital back to the repair mechanism for pulling the effects of that product back out of the system.
So in this analogy, Coca-Cola, if people drank too much of it and got fat, would be responsible for their diabetes treatment.
Well, this goes back to the sugar tax point, which is, should we have a sugar tax because there's a quantifiable effect that too much sugar has on human health? Obesity, diabetes, cancer. I mean, so that's an argument, right? And so in order to do that, the first step is disclose the risks, disclose the associated conditions that arise from the product or service that you're offering. And I think that's part of the intention. And a lot of very smart, progressive people in capital markets, some good friends of mine, have been talking for years about the importance of this level of disclosure, because it is the first step in truly accounting
for climate. You're talking about, yes, for climate.
Yeah.
Pretty controversial. Zach, do you think we should charge Coca-Cola for diabetes?
Well, ask the question of, should you charge for a carbon-related product for?
Okay, I'll ask both. Carbon. Should corporations be responsible for the downstream carbon from their customers and the upstream inputs?
At least disclose it and decide who's ultimately going to have to pay for that.
No, the answer to the former is yes. The answer to the latter is, if there's a term, shit in, shit out.
Yeah.
And,
garbage in, garbage out.
I've spent a lot of time in climate. I know what's measurable and what's not. I've looked at this space a lot. And I just think that there is no credible way to execute on, David, what you're saying you want. All it's going to do is going to create a bunch of money that flows to consultants that create BS nonsensical reports. And
is that true in your mind?
The downstream implication of that will be lawsuit upon lawsuit that gets adjudicated by the courts on this concept of materiality.
You think we should be recording at Freeburg or not? You disagree or agree with Jamal?
No, I agree it should be recorded. I'm saying it's not possible. I'm saying the only winners in this will be the consultants.
You agree with that?
Look, I'll agree. These carbon markets are absolute BS. Carbon sequestration mechanisms are absolute BS. I mean, none of this stuff is real right now.
They're complete fraudulent markets.
It's all grifters. It's all BS.
All grifters.
I'm not
trash.
I'm not trying to be too disparaging with everyone. There are good actors out there and good intentions for sure.
There is a tree in
but there's
Brazil.
A lot of ways that you can kind of take this stuff apart and say, you know what, this doesn't actually add up. And there's a good business to be had in the meantime, and everyone feels good running that business.
Simple example, Jason. How will you know that a sensor that's on a flue of a manufacturing plant is accurate? How do you know that it's not been doctored? How do you know? Just a very, very simple question. Just that.
Well, when it came to Volkswagen, a leaker leaked the information, and the press got on it, and that's how it was regulated. It was in the rearview mirror. That's how Volkswagen got busted.
So that's how we're gonna fix climate change. Is a bunch of whistleblowers.
I mean, that's what happened also with RJ Nabisco and the cigarettes as well.
And what changed as a result of that? Nothing.
No, in the cigarette industry, that led to the largest fines in the history of corporate America, I think, up until that time.
We still don't have a tax. We still don't have a pool. They don't.
We have a big tax on cigarettes, yeah, for sure, but to lower consumption. Yeah.
Yeah, but we don't force these companies to basically subsidize a portion of our healthcare costs. Every time somebody shows up with lung cancer, it's not like we say, you know what, that's going to be half borne by RJR Nabisco.
Yeah. So, I mean, the measurement can't be bad, but I guess it's what you're saying.
No. I'm saying the concept is good. The measurement is literally so terrible as to be worthless. And so
wouldn't there be a bunch of new companies that come up, though, that then create the auditing trail? So you say, hey, we're going to put you have to have one of these companies put the sensors on your factory, and Ernst & Young have to audit it. Yeah.
It's a small oddity of again, there's a lot of companies, for example, this is where Silicon Valley, I think, gets a little, caught up in their own nonsense. There's a lot of companies in Silicon Valley that have made a lot of money measuring bits, right? Analytics companies, because the exhaust of a tech company is sitting in some log file somewhere that's just a matter of being parsed, right? Do some ETL, do some transformations, put it in some beautiful table, run some query on top of it. Lo and behold, you can know everything about your company. When you're measuring atoms, it's just a little bit more complicated. And I think that people underestimate that complexity. So while the desire of this is good, I think the whole point is that, if you draft this language the wrong way, again, I want to be very precise with what I'm saying. What I think it will do, instead of actually causing more conformity and have people emitting less carbon, it'll create a shadow industry of measurement and consulting around this industry while people debate materiality when they get caught.
Got it.
That is not the point of this. But when you draft laws like this, you have to think about these implications.
So is there an easy answer here, or just no easy answers? In terms of if we want companies to be somewhat more knowledgeable and responsible in their carbon emissions?
Well, I think that the responsibility ultimately comes from the end consumer, buyer, customer of a product. Because if they have an alternative that offers them those trade-offs, whether it's at a higher price or a lower price or the same price, and they adopt it, then these companies really pay attention, right? Because ultimately, what they really care about is their downstream profitability. Otherwise, I worry that a lot of what's happening in corporate America today is basically some form of greenwashing. So for example, like, we joke, but it's true. When you look at these carbon offset markets, these indirect offset markets, what are they? A company spews all kinds of gnarly stuff into the environment. They hire a consulting firm. I just want to explain to you how it works today. They hire a consulting firm who uses an Excel spreadsheet to guesstimate how badly they have polluted the environment. Okay, it's a fundamental guess. Then they go to another company that says, well, can you buy me some equal and offsetting amount of credits? And that company then will go and plant some trees or buy some trees, claim the trees exist, measure and impute, again, in a different Excel spreadsheet, how much, carbon capture is happening by those trees. Do we know that those trees aren't getting sold 10 times over to 10 other companies? We don't know that. So my point is we have a lot of work to do to solve these problems. I would rather see, again, raw capitalism solve this problem. And I think in climate change, the most productive thing we could do is lower the barriers for trapped unproductive capital to get into the hands of really amazing scientists and entrepreneurs who are building things that can measurably remove carbon from the environment.
And there's really two easy ways to do it. One is have a test, and the other is on the roads we have a speed limit. So if you are a non-affluent person already, but you want to dabble in this, it's a very simple way to do it, Chamath. I propose have a written test, just like you can have a handgun or a car test, a driving test. And then how about you can deploy 10%?
It's so incredible you just said this. You can allow an 18-year-old person to buy an AR, give me the name of the gun, AR-15.
And a car and go speeding down the highway.
But they're not allowed to invest in GoPuff.
Yeah, no. They're not sophisticated. You can shoot the bullets in the air while you're going down the road.
What is going on?
And there's no path to it. That's the frustrating part. Like in some places, it's hard to get a gun. You got to take a 8-hour test. Other places, you can just buy them on wherever.
You can allow an 18-year-old to take psychedelics and marijuana legally, open in a market. But they are not allowed to buy secondary shares of Stripe.
No, they're too, yes. And so there's the stupidity of it. Well, here's the other thing. You can have two different things. You have the test, so now you know the person's educated, but you could also say, hey, listen, whatever's on your tax return for the last 2 years, you can invest 10% of that a year in, private companies. So if you made, I don't know, 150,000 in the last 2 years, you made 75,000 a year. Okay, you can put 15,000 of it into companies. Let me give you
another one. You will allow people to go and work for startups to help build the enterprise value of a startup. Let's pick our favorite startup like an Uber, but not invest in their equity before they go public.
Right. You're not sophisticated enough. You're sophisticated enough to build it.
You're sophisticated enough to drive for them for years to help them build a $50 billion company, but not buy a piece of that company along the way.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem right either.
But you could pull over and buy scratch-off tickets and lottery tickets till the cows come home. But you can't buy a scratch-off ticket in a startup.
This makes no sense.
All right, Sachs, you've been quiet in all of this. I know that you hate the environment and regulation. What's your thoughts?
I'm just not deep in this topic, so I don't want to weigh in.
All right, well, here's one you are deep in. Facebook hired a GOP lobbying firm to smear TikTok, according to the Washington Post. Taylor Lorenz
What do you say to Sachs?
Here's something you're deep in. It's the GOP.
No, before that, you said he's like into destroying the environment or something.
Yeah, no, he doesn't care about the environment. Sachs is never going to go into the forest and even go near a tree.
He doesn't go outside.
He barely look at him.
Sealed bedroom to his
Absolutely. He closed the curtains. He's like, oh, beautiful view of the sky. Oh,
he
nature.
Travels like the Pope. His car has one of these things. He doesn't even have to sit down. It's just enclosed. He stands up. It's bulletproof glass. He just waves as he goes by.
Zach, have you taken your kids camping?
I go outside sometimes. I much prefer going to an outdoor shooting range than an indoor shooting range. So.
Absolutely. So when you're going shooting, it's an outdoor one. So this is a really crazy story. Taylor Lorenz broke it. Facebook paid the GOP lobbying firm.
Your friend, Taylor Lorenz.
Yeah, actually, I had her on the show. Here is the excerpted from the internal targeted victory email obtained by the Washington Post. Quote, get the message out that while Meta, Facebook, is currently a punching bag, TikTok is the real threat, especially as a foreign-owned app that is number one in sharing data that young teens are using. Bonus point if we can fit this into a broader message that current bills proposals aren't where state attorney generals or member of Congress should be focused. So what do we think? I mean, we've talked here many times about reciprocity. We can't have our social networks in China. Why should TikTok be here? I think we all agree.
It sounds like they want to do a PR initiative around the points that you've always made on this pod.
Exactly. No, I mean, they could be right about this, but doing a dirty tactic.
Yeah,
I think TikTok should be banned.
It's a dirty trick in a way for them to deflect attention from themselves onto some other company's problems. So there's something distasteful about that. But the point that they're making is kind of true. I mean,
we should not allow. I mean,
I'm not saying we shouldn't allow them, but I think whatever.
Wait, you think TikTok should be allowed in the United States? Really?
I don't know about that, but I just think that.
Well, what do you think? Think about it for a second.
Whatever problems people have with Facebook, they should have them like 10x with TikTok. That's kind of my point.
1,000% in agreement on this. TikTok is run by a country that we wondered, do they care about the data? And then they literally passed a law. If you want to run your company, the government has to have the data.
I have fallen into a TikTok rabbit hole, and I would like to come clean with you guys. There's something on TikTok called Sandwich Bros. What are these guys? These guys are guys that make sandwiches. Oh. And then they cut the sandwich, and then they open it up so that you can see what's in the inside of it.
Gooey cheese.
I mean,
delicious.
Some of these fucking sandwiches these guys are making.
Good Sammy.
Dude, I have watched an hour straight of
sandwich talk
videos.
Wow.
And then, wait, here's the best part. So then there is this woman who I thought was going to be incredible. She's like, I'm tired of these sandwich bros. I'm going to be the first woman that really breaks through making sandwiches. I was like, you go get it. And she made a vegan sandwich.
God damn it.
And I was like, where's the meat? I wanted to be deep into it, but like, chicken,
roast chicken.
Oh my God. It is incredible.
Bacon, avocado.
Bacon.
Maybe some pickles in there. Get a little. Yeah. I mean, this is the thing that I find so.
Chicken tikka masala burrito. That's probably my favorite one. And the guy made it from scratch, like everything from scratch.
I love that.
Incredible.
Here's the problem. It's such a compelling product. You feel so terrible using it. So you love it at something and then you feel very vapid for having used it and you have regret. And then the Chinese are running it. And they're programming our children and have all their data and locations. It's a lot of conflicted feelings.
What
Let's
do you
just go
think
around
they're
the
trying
horn.
to program in me with all this sandwich stuff?
Maybe you're too thin and you need to eat a sandwich.
Obesity.
Well, maybe they were trying
Obesity.
to get me to be vegan, but that sandwich, yuck! It looked
Horrible.
Yuck.
I think this
Terrible.
UGC, they're trying to program
Yuck.
Chamath
No offense,
to get
Friedberg,
fat.
but yuck.
That's what they want. They want you to get fat. What are you seeing on your TikTok feed right now, Friedberg, since you're so obsessed with your phone? And should TikTok be banned? Should the Chinese be allowed to program our children with their algorithm? Yes or no, Friedberg?
Zach, what are you looking at?
Well, just mentioning the product makes me want to use it. So
It's so addicting. What is so addicting about a
Friedberg,
product?
tell me the best vegan sandwich you ever had. Like the best one. Like, is there one that stands out?
Sawdust,
Quinoa.
cucumbers,
Cucumbers.
There's a great sandwich shop in Berkeley. You guys, none of you, I don't think, ever go to Berkeley. But
I live in Palo Alto. It's too far.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Berkeley is.
I'll get one. I'll actually get one Ubered over to you.
What is it? What's
Well,
on
what's in it? What's in it?
Avocado,
What's in the
sprouts.
Yeah, there's
Avocado,
one.
sprouts I don't like.
There's one I like that's got the feta cheese, like the really good, sharp, salty feta cheese. Yeah.
Okay, so it's
But
feta
they've got
cheese and what?
a whole bunch.
Cucumber.
It's actually voted
Yuck.
one of the best sandwich shops in California, I think.
Yuck.
Yeah,
Really good.
no.
I made myself a tempeh avocado
What?
sandwich for lunch today.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. You know what? I was going to do that myself, but instead I just decided to slam my hand with a hammer because it's more enjoyable. Just like smash my hand, bang. Oh,
I had crab ravioli.
wonderful.
Delicious.
Absolutely great. You murdered those crabs.
Delicious.
Okay, but let's just go around the horn. Should, yes or no, TikTok be banned? Should a Chinese company be allowed to have a social network at scale in the United States? Yes or no, Friedberg?
No, yes, I don't think that we should be restricting the products and services that people choose to use.
Even from a communist country that is likely spying on them. Okay, got it. We know where you stand. Sachs.
well, I'd want to know that that it's not spyware, right? So
Yeah, if it's spyware,
that's
sure,
the
that's
issue.
illegal. If it's illegal, stop it. But like,
Okay. So you're saying
it's not illegal.
you trust the Chinese government?
No,
Got
I
it.
don't trust them. It would be an issue I'd seriously look at. I might come out on the India side of things, but I'd like to understand a little better like what they're
The India
doing.
side of things being that India has
They
banned.
banned it, yeah. They just
They
banned
banned
it.
They're smart. Indians
Yeah.
are smart
I would
and
think
pragmatic.
about that.
I just
I'd
think it's a
about that,
I think
but-
it's a
but I
slippery
wanna
slope because
know-
then you end up seeing China ban iPhones, and I mean, the whole thing kind of escalates.
We're already banned. They already banned Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram in their
I
country.
don't know.
They don't allow us in there.
There's still a lot. There's a big consumer market in China for U.S. goods and services, and it
Chamath,
just seems like a
where do you
slippery
sit?
slope.
Where do you sit
I
on this?
think you guys nailed it, which is that I think these things have to be quid pro quo. It doesn't make any sense, in my opinion, for us to allow a non-American company to thrive where in that same end market, our products are not allowed to compete.
Absolutely.
So I think there are two things that matter to me, which is that, if we're going to allow TikTok to thrive here, it seems like there needs to be some version of a deal that says Facebook, Google, these core
Twitter.
products and services just need to have a chance where
LinkedIn.
consumers can vote. That's one thing. And I do think separately what David said is really importantly true. And I don't think it applies to just TikTok, but whenever a product gets to a certain level of scale, and we can define what that threshold is, but it's probably in the 500 million to
10%.
a billion MAU kind of range, monthly active users range. You do have to a way of going through the source and making sure there's no crazy spyware in there. And I don't know exactly how to do that. But I think that should just be a general expectation for any product. Because look, let's be honest, and we've had this conversation before. You don't think the odds are high that at some point some very talented knowledge worker that is on an immigrant visa inside of one of these large tech companies isn't actually working on behalf of a foreign organization?
Twitter had it. They had two people from the kingdom working there.
So my point is, I think that these things are probably true, right? Like in the tens of thousands of employees that work in big tech, there's probably at least 5 or 10 of these people that work on behalf of foreign governments. So we don't know what they may or may not have introduced in certain elements of the code. So it's not unreasonable to fund an organization that can audit this code base. But I think that I would rather let them stay in order to open up that end market for our products.
All right, we have to wrap on this. Freeberg, a couple of weeks ago, you outlined the potential of famines caused by Putin's insane, war in Ukraine.
That's not what I said, but sure. I highlighted
I'm
the risk.
framing it the way I want, but you commented on the possible famine caused by Putin's insane war.
Again, not what I said, but sure. Yeah.
Well, let's go to famine before Sachs loses his mind about Biden's quote of regime change, which I'll let you end on, Sachs. You get your victory lap. But somebody came for you and said, hey, listen, Freeberg basically doesn't know what he's talking about because commodity markets are showing that India and other folks are going to step up and there's not going to be a problem with famine. So can you unpack that for us?
I will tell you that we are already seeing a lot of scrambling happening for redundancy in these commodity supply chains. And there's a couple of issues, which I highlighted before, I'll highlight again. Number one is just the ability to export. So while there may be commodity products sitting in these markets, getting them on ships out of Russia, out of Ukraine, even if sanctions and trade restrictions are lifted and make them available, is very difficult because a lot of the carriers are concerned about insurance and liability as they would be forced to go into a port and do a transaction with an entity that they're supposed to not do transactions with. So there's a lot of reasons why these ships are not going to port, not picking up product, and not bringing it to where it needs to go. Critical risk in Africa in the near term. So this is an acute problem with respect to transport. The next problem is with respect to planting. As of this week, and I'm going to put a couple of links in here, and these links, Nick, are not in order with respect to what I'll say, but I'll kind of put a bunch of these things out here. But there is an expectation that we could see up to an 80% decline in planted acres in the Ukraine. And there's a bunch of really good anecdotes in this particular story about how farmers are scared about going out and planting because drones might blow them up. And I mean, look, you're in the middle of a war zone. You're not in a rush to go out and plant. And so there's a lot of planting that needs to happen in order for us to have, the expectation of the supply coming out of the field in about 6 months. So that's kind of the second stage of the problem, is a large export market for goods coming out of Ukraine and Russia we might have a kind of significant reduction in inventory as the number of acres that are planted goes down. And then the third thing that I highlighted before, which is absolutely still very true, and I have put some data in here that you can all look at, is related to the price of fertilizer. So fertilizer prices through the roof because nat gas has gone up, so ammonia prices have gone up. Potash exports are prohibited from Russia, so potash has gone up. And so as a result, we're seeing fertilizer prices shoot up. And in a lot of countries, what I've included here in this particular link in the chat, and Nick on the YouTube, you can kind of put this on the screen, but there's a guy named Gary Schnitke. Gary is the ag economist. He's like the number one ag economist in the world. He's at University of Illinois. Everyone reads all his stuff in the industry. This guy breaks everything down to unit economics, numbers, helps people make decisions about what to plant, when, what the economics are. And he highlights the current economics for planting in Illinois. Illinois is the largest corn producing state in the U.S. and a critical supplier of our national kind of food supply. And he points out that as of right now, you would have to invest in Illinois about $810 to have a $243 return on corn because the price of fertilizer has gone so high. So you invest $810, you expect to make a little over $1,000. And these are not assuming rent. The problem is when you factor in the cost of rent, the average rent in Illinois is $227. So a lot of farmers in Illinois rent their land, about half do. And so for a lot of farmers, it's actually uneconomical, not just in Illinois, but around the world now, where the cost of the inputs, the cost of rent, the cost of production exceeds the expected profit coming out of the farm. And so farmers are not going to plant. And so, we're seeing kind of a major issue with these farmers around the world kind of making planting decisions right now that are informed by upside down economics. This is being monitored. Fortunately in the US, the USDA reported today that it looks like the price of corn is such that a lot of farmers are going to go back and plant soybeans. And we're seeing basically a historic planting survey coming out today that says farmers are in fact going to go out in the field. They are in fact going to plant. But this is not true everywhere. We haven't done the calculus on it yet, but there is a ton of anecdotal support and a ton of survey data that's coming out showing that farmers aren't going to plant the acres that they normally would plant because costs are so high. That means there's going to be less production over the next year. That means famine hits us in a year. That's a big problem.
Sachs wants to know why they don't just use DoorDash or Uber Eats. He's to just order more food if they can't get
This is not
the
what's
wheat.
going through David's mind right now.
David is
honing in. He's like LeBron in the fourth quarter.
Yes.
There's
got a set
minute
play
left. He's like, everybody get out of the way. Give me the ball.
Just ISO ball. He's going to do his ISO
ball. He's about to play ISO ball.
Clear out.
3,
All right, here we
2,
go.
1, David, go.
All right, here we go. So right as we got off air and I was defending, hey, listen, you're mind reading Biden. He's never said regime change. You got to give him some credit here. You're taking madman Putin's version of events over our own presidents. And then 12 hours later, I'm on the ski lift and crazy grandpa decides to say, for God's sake, this man, referring to Putin, cannot remain in power. Of course, the White House walked this back, but go ahead and take your victory lap, Sachs.
Oh my God, am I getting an apology here from J-Cal too?
It's not an apology. At the time I was right, but I didn't.
Closest to an
You
apology,
said
I think,
it was basically pro Putin because of what I said, and now you're admitting that I was telling the truth.
No, I admit that Biden, crazy grandpa, said something he shouldn't have said, and that maybe that reflects truly how he feels.
Right. That's called, so in Washington, they call that a Kinsley gaffe.
A Kinsley gaffe,
The New Republic editor, Michael Kinsley, who said, a gaffe in Washington is when a politician accidentally tells the truth. That's what Biden did. He accidentally told the truth about what the administration's policy has been.
Yes.
And, you can see this in the fact that, look, who's playing peacemaker right now in these peace conversations? It's been Macron from France. It's been Naftali Bennett from Israel. It's been Erdogan from Turkey. It has not been anyone from the United States. We've been strangely absent. And to the extent we said anything about the peace process, it always seems to be us throwing cold water on it. So there's been a lot of people, prominent commentators like Neil Ferguson, who I quoted before, and others, who have speculated that the United States' goal here is not a rapid resolution to the conflict, but rather to protract it in order to make Russia bleed, in order to destabilize and topple the Russian regime. I think it was actually quite, and the problem with that is it's just very dangerous. I mean, just look at what Freeberg just said about the food insecurity that's causing. It is very dangerous for us to protract this conflict so that famine could be worse, the war could spread, it could degenerate, we could get drawn into it somehow. We want this thing to be over as quickly as possible. And I think it was actually the Biden gaffe net was a very positive thing because they had to walk it back so quickly
and severely that it showed the whole world and the media and the administration, no, we really need to end this quickly. We can't be dragging this thing out. So I think by stating what their clandestine policy was so clearly, it forced them to have to disavow it. And the only people who were upset at the end of the day were these neocons who were like, no, what Biden said is true. We should try and topple Putin. Yeah, theoretically he should go, but not right now. It's like, well, which
everybody
is
had to disavow it. And that was actually very clarifying for U.S. policy because regime change should not be our goal.
I think the administration said something to the effect of, he was speaking as a man, not as a president.
I mean, can we be honest about Biden? I mean, they don't know what he's going to say next. I mean, I don't mean to, speak ill of anybody, but cognitively, this is a huge gaffe. It's a huge mistake. We're trying to resolve this thing, and then you give Putin exactly the ammunition he wants. Oh, look, it's regime change. See? And I think what we may have here is two crazy grandpas. One that wants to put the USSR back together, and one that wants to be the person who ousts Putin. Neither of those is what the world wants.
It's a real bummer that we are kind of on the second stage here, just idling around, looking around, while these other countries are sort of creating a, almost like this new world order around us. It's a bummer.
Yeah.
We played our hand very badly because we keep intervening in all these countries where there's no upside. I mean, I keep talking about it. All of these wars where we spent trillions and we got nothing out of it.
You're a peacenik. We like it.
I'm just, I don't see
peace is a beautiful thing.
I'm a realist.
Beautiful thing.
First of all, I do like peace better than war, but I don't understand the point of going to war when there's no vital American interest that's been jeopardized. Our security is not jeopardized. Our economy is not jeopardized. In fact, us protracting the war is going to jeopardize those things. So I don't get what American policy is designed to achieve or has been designed to achieve for the last 20 years. We've just been stumbling around the world, making all these virtue signaling statements about values, And then meanwhile, we end up like bombing the hell out of these countries.
Well, the Middle East was clearly
Libya,
for oil
Syria,
and energy.
Afghanistan.
Let's be honest. Those were about oil.
No oil
that was our vital interest.
What were we doing? They're trying to build a new state, a new sort of democracy in Afghanistan.
It was
revenge for 9/11.
Bin Laden.
Yeah. It was revenge for 9/11.
That was legitimate. That was a legitimate reason to go there, which was to get Osama bin Laden. That was the just cause.
Whack the
But you know what? And you know what? We should have got him at Tora Bora instead of outsourcing it to the locals. That was a total screw up.
Huge mistake.
But once that job was done, we should have been out of there.
Absolutely.
Out of there.
Absolutely. What a misadventure. Do you have any thoughts, Sachs, on like the end game here? Because it does seem like Putin is getting exhausted, and maybe he gets the win.
I think we know what the end game is gonna be. It's basically Ukraine's gonna be neutral. They can't be part of NATO. They get some security guarantees from the West in exchange for that. Crimea is part of Russia. That's a fait accompli. It happened in 2014. And then the last part is what they're really fighting over, which is this Donbass region, where you've got Russian ethnic speakers going up against Ukrainian far-right nationalists.
How close are we?
And they can't agree. Well, both those sides are willing to fight. So that's the issue. And look, the truth of the matter is, I think it's going to result in some form of independence for these disputed territories of Donetsk and Luhansk, right? I mean, but the reality is the United States of America doesn't have a vital interest.
We're 37 days into this. Is it going to end in under 60?
Sachs suggested the right approach, I think, a month ago, which is let all of those people vote.
Just have a plebiscite, have a referendum.
Create a referendum, let them vote, let them be self-deterministic, and that may be the most reasonable middle ground for both sides to say, okay, let's give this a shot. But
you're right. If you could achieve a ceasefire, if you could get a ceasefire here.
War's terrible. End this.
Yeah, if you could get a ceasefire, have the UN observers come in, administer an election in Crimea. There's no doubt which way Crimea would go. I don't know what would happen in Luhansk or Donetsk. I think they probably would go independent. So let's just do a vote. It'll be about self-determination, not appeasement, and let's find out. That's what we should be pushing for.
Yeah, people getting to vote on their future. Wow, crazy idea. I mean, it's got to end. It's got to end in month 2. This is becoming super damaging for Putin, right? I mean, these economic sanctions, plus
but you see there's a story that was on MSN.
It's like day 37. Do you realize it's going on for
Putin's
37
approval rating
days?
in Russia is 83%. So his approval ratings have gone up. We thought, you could say it's fake or whatever, but apparently this is a reasonably decent polling operation. This is a poll by Levada Center, an independent pollster in Moscow.
We'll see.
Apparently his poll numbers were 69% in January. They've gone up. Look, Russians will rally around the flag just like
what about the
Americans
resources? And they're suffering in that country.
They are suffering, but the Russians are very good at suffering, J. Cal. It's their national pastime. You ever read Dostoevsky?
Yeah, no, I don't like to read it.
War and Peace or whatever?
Yeah, no, I don't actually. I would much rather watch the next Marvel movie or a Kurosawa film. I am not interested in
listen, my whole speech was about the fact that American diplomacy could have prevented this situation last year. That's not to say that we caused it. It's Putin's decision to invade. It's his war. The bloodshed is on him. However, more effective diplomacy could have diffused the situation a year ago. And we totally blew it. We just totally blew it. And this is going to hurt us. Look, this is one of those things that the administration thinks doesn't affect them. But you know what? When our economy goes into a recession, because this is the straw that breaks the camel's back, voters are going to take it into consideration.
We do hire people in many industries to do their job, and the people that are hired to be diplomats, their job is to be diplomatic and to find compromises.
All right, everybody, it's time to wrap here. Some exciting news on the conference front. Palmer Luckey of Anduril Technologies, building weapons and systems and defensive systems, is going to come to the event. He's not. He's a fan of the pod, apparently. He's a big fan of David Sax's. So we're going to talk about the military. And just as a general concept, I have a theme I was just going to float by y'all. I think a lot of the talks and a lot of the zeitgeist is around the problem I want to solve. So I'd like you all to think about that. I think this will be a celebration of people who are trying to solve important problems in the world. So what are you solving for is going to be the theme of the event. What are you trying to solve for? And so, nice. Freeberg, if you can give maybe a little talk. Chamath, David, it would be great if the four besties gave a little 15-minute solo talk. We're going to have a lot of these solo talks, position, hey, here's what I'm solving for, and then conversations about what we're solving for.
Freeberg, do you know Dalio? You should get Dalio. I think he'd be great.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And Kathy Wood looks like, I think Kathy Wood's coming too.
But by the way, there's a new video that Dalio just put out, which is like the 45-minute animated documentary version of his book.
Really good.
And really good. I watched it. I
watched it too.
I haven't read the book, but I watched it, and I thought it was really great. It's all about how empires rise and fall, and it's pretty clear that he thinks we're a late-stage empire. And he talks about a lot of the things that we're talking about on the show. And
I watched it this week. I thought it was exceptional.
So you guys
and then
are coming
I ordered
around.
the book. Yeah, I thought it was really good.
I'm halfway through listening.
Oh, look at you guys coming around. You could have listened to me like a year ago.
You have to watch it on YouTube because his animations are excellent.
Very nice.
Yeah,
the YouTube video is just superb.
It's very accessible. I mean,
it's
anybody
incredibly good. Highly recommend.
Yeah. I mean, look, I agree with him. I agree with him.
One of you guys get Dalio on the thing? Let's get him.
Yeah, so, Dalio, reach out. We know you're listening, so can somebody
I think the question to ask Dalio is...
He's not listening.
I think he is, actually. I think he's a fan of the show. Yeah.
I think the question to ask Dalio is, how do you revitalize a late-stage empire?
That's right.
That's a good...
That is the question. Can it be done?
Send him a DM.
Well, can it be done? I think is the real question. All in Summit, May 15, 16, 17.
I think can is too theoretical. I think it's more, how would you do it? Yeah.
Yeah, if it's possible, what would the path be? And it's got to be something about building the pie, not shrinking it. That's for sure. May 15, 16, 17, the conference is the 16th and the 17th. 625 of 700 tickets allocated. If you'd like to apply for a scholarship, go ahead and do that. It's not going to be a bro down. The ratio has... Congrats
to you, Jason, for really pushing the diversity and getting a lot of scholarships and women and people of color. It's good. Thank you for that.
Really, really, really great to see so many people applying. If you didn't get a response back for your application, you'll get it by April 15th. That's going to be when we tell everybody if they're officially in or out. But we have been increasing the ratio. It was organically 95% male, female. And now it's 65-35. So we're really making progress on that front. So it's not going to be a bro down. Sorry, Sachs. It's not going to be a bro down. It's going to be diversity here. Diversity equals power, Sachs.
I hope there's diversity of ideas too.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there you have it, folks. For the Rain Man, David Sachs, Sultan of Science.
Can't wait to see one third of my besties tonight. Thanks a lot, guys.
Yeah, I'm showing up. I mean, you got
a seat open.
You're the one over the three.
Well, I mean, these guys, you got to remember, these guys would have to have their drivers.
Translator.
Well, these guys would have to have their drivers.
Nick, beep the name.
Yeah, these guys would have to have their drivers drive them 30 minutes and then wait for them outside and then drive them home after they've drank in $5,000 worth of your wine. It's a little bit overbearing.
What are you going to pour tonight, Chamath?
It'll be some really good stuff. Probably some like older Sasakai, I'm thinking 85s.
Ooh.
But Freeberg, if you come, I can also make some tempeh.
It's going to be the best tempeh and sprout ravioli you've ever had.
Good for you. It's good for the family. It's good for the planet. It's good for the animals.
What is tempeh?
It's soybeans, fermented soybeans. It's delicious.
You know what? Can I tell you what I think? Yuck! Yuck!
Yeah.
But I mean, in fairness, your chef always makes something exceptional for Freeberg when he comes to dinner.
Yeah, it's always you're always a generous host, and your chef is always exceptional.
So get Sachs's driver and come down.
Come, Sachs, send the heli up to Marin to grab me.
Freeburgers, come. Just get a driver. Sachs, when do you land?
Late tonight.
Cool on tilt. Come on tilt.
No. It'll be like 3 a.m. or something.
Oh, 3 a.m. My gosh.
No, fuck that. The game's over by then. All right. See you later, besties.
Love you guys.
Bye-bye.
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 Back at you. We'll let your winners ride.
Rain Man, David Sachs.
And instead, we open source it to the fans, and they've just gone crazy with it.
Love you, besties.
The Queen of Quinoa. Besties are back.
That is my dog taking a notice in your driveway.
Oh, man.
My haberdasher will meet me at Flynn's. We should all just get a room and just have one big huge orgy because they're all just useless. It's like this sexual tension that they just need to release somehow.
Wet your beak. Wet your beak.
Wet your beak.
We need to get merch.
Besties are back.